Hello everyone! I wanted to share with you a new miniature Phalenopsis that I received today as a gift. I absolutely love this little miniature. I used to really have a hard time with my miniature Phalenopsis orchids. I never could get them to grow. They usually just shriveled up and I never did know why. And so I finally learned a few years ago that when you bring them home, they're in a moss plug. And they're in way too much moss for the hydration to even get to the roots, believe it or not. So I decided, okay, if I leave it in the moss when I bring it home, the plant is most likely going to just shrivel up and die. But if I go ahead and I transplant it immediately, I might lose maybe one bud due to bud blast, maybe. Sometimes not though. Sometimes I've kept all of the blooms and the buds have bloomed out. I have had so much better success with that method. I haven't lost one since I started doing that. So let me show you how much moss this little girl was packed in and you'll see what I mean. Okay, this was her home. And do you see that little tiny hole in the bottom? That was the only drainage hole in that whole pot. Okay, check out all of this moss. That is enough moss for about a 5-inch pot, and this is a 1-inch pot. So this was crammed around the roots. The roots were very dry. Even after I watered the moss, there was so much moss packed in that pot that it didn't even penetrate any further than about 1/4 of an inch. This moss is actually dry. After I ran about a 1/2 cup of water through it, it just runs along the sides of the pot when the moss is packed too tightly. So after I unpacked the moss, I placed this one in some water culture just for about a day. I want these roots to hydrate really well. All of these were just silvery gray, which means they didn't have any hydration at all, even after I watered them. So you can see how that can just dehydrate the entire plant. What happens is when the roots aren't hydrated, then the plant will just dry up. So I'm going to make sure that these roots are nice and hydrated before I put it in a new mossy home. So I am rehydrating my New Zealand sphagnum moss. I love this moss. And I am rehydrating it in the CalMag mixture with a tiny little bit of Epsom salts that I discussed the other day. What I do is I place about 16 drops of CalMag, and let me show you that product so you'll know what it looks like. Okay, here is the CalMag that I use, and I use 16 drops of it. I use a pipette, and I use 16 drops per gallon. I also use just a pinch of Epsom salts. Just a pinch will do. I'm aiming for about 70 to 80 parts per million in that solution, and then I hydrate my New Zealand sphagnum moss with that. And I've had great success with using that small amount of CalMag and Epsom salts in my transplants. They have just done so very well. They don't go through transplant shock. And I've noticed that they rarely ever lose a bloom or a bud when I go ahead and transplant them using that CalMag and Epsom salts as well. So that's really, really good, especially when they are in flower. So this root system is looking better and better the more that it hydrates. This is what I'm going to use as its new home. This is about a 2.5-inch pot. And as you can see, if I tried to place all of that moss into here, I don't think that it would even fit in there. This is the old moss that I was telling you about. Old brown basket moss will turn acidic on you really, really fast. I believe that's the other issue with having success with your miniature Phalenopsis orchids. This moss turns acidic very, very quickly. So you want to get it out of this old brown basket moss. It's really not for long-term use with orchids at all. So make sure that you get a really good orchid grade sphagnum moss, or use New Zealand sphagnum moss, and I use the Best Grow brand. I really like that moss. So I hope that helps you all and answers some of the questions that I've been receiving lately about repotting, because so many people don't like to repot while they're blooming. But I've just found that, especially with my miniatures, I have so much better success with the bloom cycle and getting them to do really, really well in the future when I go ahead and just repot them immediately after receiving them. So you all have a highly favored, deeply loved, and greatly blessed day. And we'll talk to you next time.